Greetings class, welcome to Duel Academy. Professor Rivas here, and this will be the first lesson of your second class in your raw yellow term, YGO Game Terminology, real world terms. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to be up to date with the latest Duel Academy lessons and assessments. So without further ado, get your deck, get your game on, and let's get started. The purpose of this course is to understand and apply key terms and phrases used by duelists both in and out of duels. If you ever hear experienced players duel, or even experienced players having a conversation, they may be using lingo that isn't exactly found in the rulebook. In the 20 plus years that the game has been around, Yu-Gi-Oh! Slang has been created as a sort of shorthand in conversation. Today, we'll focus on terms that you may hear in casual conversation between duelists. Meta. Competitive decks in the current ban list and card pool. Meta decks are not only the current strongest decks, but also the most represented decks in tournaments. Meta decks typically change when a new ban list drops, since the purpose of the ban list is to keep balance in the game, and make sure certain decks don't remain too dominant for too long. An example would be the current meta, which at the time of recording this video, is Tearlaments and Spray. Anti-meta. Cards, decks, or strategies specifically designed to counter the best decks. These decks have the sole purpose of shutting down the meta decks in some way, shape, or form. Not always, but typically they are control or stun decks that are flooded with monsters with effects that limit your opponent, like Inspector Boarder and Phosodina Pachycephalo, hand traps that slow down your opponent's momentum, like Ash Blossom, and floodgates like Goes in Match and There Can Only Be One to limit your opponent even further. Anti-meta decks prevent the meta decks from doing their thing. Bump. In terms of card rarity, when a reprint of an individual card has its rarity upgraded higher than either its initial release or other previous reprints of a lower rarity. An example would be when Forbidden Droplet first dropped in Rise of the Duelist as a secret rare, and then later dropped in OTS Tournament Pack 16 as an ultimate rare. Chase card. The most highly sought after card in a booster pack, usually attested to that card's power or value. A good example of this would be Lightning Storm, when it dropped in Ignition Assault. Duelists sought after this powerful chase card, wanting to have the power of both Raigeki and Harpy's Feather Duster in one card. Consistency. The frequency at which a deck performs the way it is intended to perform. We previously discussed consistency in the Deck Building 101 class. To review, feel free to revisit the class. Evolution/Retrain. A card that is better than another card while the two cards hold a similar design or function. This commonly happens with monsters that were printed in the DM era and were later reprinted with a better effect. For example, Magician of Black Chaos was later retrained to Dark Magician of Chaos, and Blackluster Soldier was later retrained to Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning. Format. The game based on the available card pool and forbidden/limited list at a specific period of time. Lottery card. Card or cards in core booster packs that exist as multiple rarities, of which the higher of the rarity in question has obviously more value and a lower chance of being pulled. A recent lottery card could be found in the Power of the Elements booster set, where you can pull Ultimate Slayer in Secret Rare or Starlight Rare, the Starlight Rare being the lottery card. Power creep. The process of which new cards outclass old cards in terms of strength. A very basic example of power creep is the spell card Sparks and Hinotama. Both have the same purpose of causing direct damage to your opponent, but Hinotama just does a better job at it. Record. A player's current standing in a tournament. It is usually represented in the XO or X1 format, where X is the number of wins and the right digit is the number of losses. Rule sharking. The abuse of game rules or tournament regulations to gain unfair advantages. This form of unfair conduct is often used on less experienced players. The main issue with rule sharking is that it causes unnecessary judge calls to penalize a player. it is frowned upon to unnecessarily call a judge and can even result in a penalty. An example of rorschaching is calling a judge because your opponent has a Spanish copy of Monster Reborn, but doesn't have a translation for it. Although it is a rule to have a translation for a foreign card, if a judge sees that you have a copy of Monster Reborn yourself, you already know what the card does. Therefore, calling a judge was unnecessary and only done to use a tournament policy against your opponent. Scaling refers to the act of weighing booster packs with an electronic scale to determine which pack has a rare card. Since certain rarities weigh more than others, using a sensitive electronic scale can be used to only get packs with a holographic card. This isn't as common anymore, since local stores typically don't allow this. Plus, Yu-Gi-Oh! Booster packs usually bring some sort of holo in every pack now. Scoop. Surrender. The term originated from duelists scooping up their cards to move on to the next game of a match. In tournaments, it is common to scoop when a player sees they won't be able to win a duel, so they would rather scoop in order to have more time in the following duels. Staple. A good card that can be used in many decks. Staples can change based on the format, but there are some staples with specific purposes that are timeless. For example, for spell and trap removal, you have staples like Mystical Space Typhoon, Cosmic Cyclone, Twin Twisters, and Harpy's Feather Duster. For monster removal, you have staples like Dark Hole and Raigeki. For the purpose of special summoning from the grave, you have staples like Monster Reborn and Call of the Haunted. Sideboard, which is just another name for side deck. Stacking, the act of arranging cards to ensure a player draws a good card while the other doesn't. Tech/Spice, a card or cards placed in a main deck, side deck, or extra deck for the purpose of supporting a deck with cards that help it run smoother, deal with cards that would counter the deck, or to combat specific deck builds often run in the current metagame. In a tournament, many players will be playing the same meta decks of the format, but tech cards are what help differentiate them. So although the decks will run the same core, the tech cards will be different and dependent on what kind of player the duelists running the deck is. Tier N. Tiers are grouping systems that when which decks are ranked on their competitive viability and performance in a particular format. Tier N equals the number that could be beaten by other Tier N decks of the same or higher tiering, those whose numbers are less than N. Tier 1 is at the top, followed by Tier 2, sometimes we have a Tier 3, followed by Rogue. Tier 0, a deck that can only be beaten by itself. Tier 0 decks aren't common, but it does happen every once in a while. Basically, the deck is so insanely good that no other deck can beat it, except itself. Top. Achieving prizing from a tournament or making it to the secondary stage of larger tournament events. X of. The number of copies of certain cards one runs in a deck, where X equals the number of copies. For example, if a duelist says, I run 2 of Pot of Desires, that means they have 2 copies in their deck. Playset. 3 copies of a single card. Thank you so much for attending this class. There will be a quiz in this lesson, so don't forget to take it. I hope you have a great day, and class dismissed.